Good evening. It's 8 o'clock in Yerushalayim. This is WebYeshiva.org, and it's time to begin our regular halacha shir. Our topic for this evening is prayer for the sick and suffering, and as in general, dealing with the technical issues will enable us, will lead us to a deeper understanding of the fundamental ideas underlie the prayers we're talking about. Let's get the source materials here on the screen and let the sources speak for themselves. First of all, we begin with a passage in the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, and as in all of my shiurim, I'm not going to bother mentioning exactly where the sources are taken from, because you have the exact sources on the screen, and you can check them out yourself and see what my typographical errors are. In any event, what it says in the Gemara is Kol Kesh Rachamim al Havero. Anyone who is praying for Rachamim, for mercy for someone. Someone is in a difficult situation. They're sick. Well, it doesn't matter what their problems are. Everyone has problems. But here's someone who has serious problems, and we want to pray for Rachamim. We want a Kadosh Baruch Hu to rain down mercy on so and so. Because of his or her difficult situation. Whenever you're doing that, and let me just point out that the word havero, although havero in modern Hebrew means a friend, in rabbinic Hebrew, the word haver does not mean friend. In rabbinic Hebrew, the word haver refers to someone that you are engaged with in a mutual activity. You engage in a mutual activity with someone, that's your chaver. It's not talking about emotional closeness. The Hebrew word, the rabbinic word chaver, is not talking about emotional closeness. It's talking about being involved, being engaged in a joint effort. So in a sense, this applies to all Jews, are our chaverim, because all Jews are engaged together in mutual endeavors, but it can also refer to specific activities that you're involved with someone else, and that's your chaver, that's your colleague. Well, if you want to daven for rachamim, you want to pray for mercy for someone, whether it's illness or any other serious problem, Eino tzarich lahazkir shmo. You don't have to mention the person's name. After all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God knows who you're talking about, who you're asking mercy for. You don't have to mention the name. And indeed, there's a proof for this in the verse in the Torah. What the Torah says is, V'yitzak Moshe el Hashem lemor, when Miriam, Moshe Rabbeinu's sister, was sick and she needed a salvation, she needed mercy from the heavens. When Miriam, Moshe Rabbeinu's sister, was sick, Moshe Rabbeinu called out. Moshe Rabbeinu prayed to God, and these were his words, Kel na rafa na la. 5 words. Oh God, please heal her. That's it. 5 words. Oh God, please heal her. Her name was not mentioned in Moshe's prayer. That therefore proves that you don't have to mention the name of whoever you're davening for. Lo kol de Miriam, Moshe Rabbeinu never mentioned the name of his sister Miriam, for whom he was praying, for whom he was davening. Well, that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Since HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what you have in your heart, only you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu know what is in your heart, well, you don't have to mention the name. This idea is taken up in Sefer Pardes. Sefer Pardes is not actually written by Rashi. I wrote this written by Rashi. It's not literally written by Rashi. Historians disagree about exactly which of Rashi's Talmidim wrote this Sefer, but it was written by one of his Talmidim. Yeah. We'll come in a moment to the fact that Miriam was in Moshe Rabbeinu's presence. We're going to come to this. The Sefer HaPardes was written by one of Rashi's disciples. We don't have to enter into the arguments here, the historical arguments about exactly which of his disciples wrote the Sefer, but the Sefer is a compilation, a collection of Rashi's ideas. Um, well, uh, quotes the Gemara, just looked at. You don't have to mention the name. And Alma Rebbe, my teacher, that's Rashi, because it's written by one of Rashi's disciples, my teacher said, anyone who is praying for mercy does not mention the name of the person for whom you're davening. Flat out, no reason to mention the person's name. Now, the problem with this is that Rashi, as he is quoted by the disciple, contradicts what Rashi himself wrote in his commentary on the Gemara. Let's look at what Rashi wrote in his commentary on the Talmudic passage that we just saw on the previous screen. Well, Rashi says, Kol halachot, whenever you are praying for someone, or whenever you are praying over someone, even if you are just uttering an incantation. I know that incantations are not so popular nowadays, but back in Talmudic times, incantations were really very popular. Well, it doesn't matter what the form of your prayer is. It doesn't matter what the structure of your prayer is. Rashi says, Bishma de'ima, mention the person and name the person you are davening for with the person's mother. So and so the son of the mother, so and so the daughter of, always with the mother's name. The structure in which you should mention someone's name when you are davening for him or her is Ploni ben Plonis, so and so, the son of or the daughter of, with the mother's name. Now, Rashi seems to, we have here a contradiction. Rashi, in his commentary on the Gemara, makes perfectly clear that you should mention the mother's name of the person for whom you are davening, so and so the son of, so and so the daughter of, which contradicts what the Talmud, what the disciple quotes him as having said. Of these two opinions, well, maybe Rashi changed his mind. I mean, that would be the simplest way to explain the contradiction. At one point in his life, he taught the Talmidim, you don't have to mention the name at all. In another point in his life, when he wrote the commentary on the Gemara, he emphasized the importance of mentioning the mother's name. That would be the simplest explanation for the apparent contradiction here. In any event, we're left with two opinions of Rashi. According to one, no need to mention the person's name at all. According to the second, the name should be specified and should be specified in a specific pattern, so and so, the son of, with the mother's name. Now, of these two approaches, as I'm sure you know, it's the approach of Rashi on the Gemara which predominates. After all, the Sefer HaPardes that I quote here, a lot of Talmidim in the Beis Midrash, many yeshiva students never even heard of this Sefer HaPardes. The commentaries on the Gemara, on the other hand, are of course very well known and therefore more influential. And therefore, although the opinion exists that the name need not be mentioned, that is not the predominant opinion which dominates subsequent thought. Let's see how this plays out in the thinking of subsequent poskim. Here we have a quotation from Panim Yafot. Panim Yafot was written by Rav Pinchas Horowitz, as I wrote on the screen. He was one of the very first Hasidic masters. He was a disciple of the Maggid of Mezrich. The Baal Shem Tov's Talmud was the Maggid of Mezrich. The disciple, the Talmud of the Maggid of Mezrich, was Rav Pinchas Halevi Horowitz, whom we are about to quote. Now, in addition to being one of the founding fathers of the Hasidic movement, the Panim Yafos was also one of the great Rabbanim, one of the great poskim of the early 18th century. Let's see what he has to say about this issue. Kvar Amru Chazal. The Gemara already makes clear, Shekol halachashim, all incantations, the tefillot, and all kinds of prayers, all kinds of incantations, and all kinds of prayers. Kiyum brius haguf, if the prayer or the incantation has to do with someone's health, if that's what you're praying for, someone's health, B'Shem Imo, you have to mention the mother's name. Tfilot aliyot, B'Shem Ha'av. But if someone gets an aliyah Torah on Shabbat or any other day when the Torah is read, and there are going to be brachot and tefillot, which that person wants to bless bless members of the congregation. He wants to bless family members with good health, with whatever he wants to bless them with. Well, since we're not talking about a health situation having to do with the physical body, then the name of the Father is involved. Oh, you're praying for someone's business success? So-and-so, the son of so-and-so, the daughter of the father's name. You're praying for someone to find a mate to marry? Well, so-and-so, the son of, or so-and-so, the daughter of the father's name. But if it has to do with health of the body, the mother's name is used. Now, he does not explain exactly why this distinction exists, but that's what he says. And not surprisingly, being one of the leading poskim of early modern times and being one of the founders of the Hasidic movement, not surprisingly, this is an opinion which has vast influence. Let's see how this plays out, how this influence plays out in the Divrei Torah. Divrei Torah is a sefer written by the Munkacher Rebbe. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Elazar Shapiro was his name. He was the Munkacher, the Rebbe of Munkach in Hungary, and he too was one of the great Hasidic masters who combined greatness in halacha. His She'elot Tshuvot, his halachic responsa are very important and influential. We're quoting now from one of his Hasidic books. In one of his Hasidic works, Tama al Divrei Panim Yafos, he quotes what we just saw on the previous screen, what the Panim Yafos wrote about always using the mother's name if it's a matter of health of the body. And he says, that's surprising. Why did he write what he wrote? Harei inyan tefilot va'aliyot neshama b'shem aviv lo nimtza b'divrei chazal. Why did he add the importance of using the Father's name in other circumstances? If you want to pray for someone's business success, if you want to pray for someone to find a mate to marry, why did he insist on the Father's name? There's no source for that anywhere in earlier rabbinic literature. We saw sources in Rashi, and the sources can be magnified, there are many other sources which one could add to Rashi. There are sources about the mother's name, But why did the Panim Yafos insist on the father's name if it's a prayer aside from matters of health? Elavadai kibel bala panim yafos mirabo hagadol hamagid mimezrich. It must be that the panim yafos learned this from his teacher, the Maggid of Mezrich, who in turn was the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov himself. Oh, we're going to come to what to do in the situations where you don't know the parent's name and what to do in the case of adoption. We're going to get to that. The well, Tamadavar, what is the reason that underlies all this? Why, in matters of health, did probably the Baal Shem Tov and probably the Maggid of Mezrich and surely the Panim Yafos, why did they insist on the mother's name in cases of health? Why? Kevan de v'pikuach nefesh chashinin l'miyuta, because there's a rule that runs through the length and breadth of Talmudic literature. The rule is follow the majority. When you are in doubt, in cases of doubt, begin by assuming halacha begins by instructing us to assume that the case before us is a typical example of the majority of cases. Until there's evidence to the contrary, majority rules in halacha. That's a very important rule, the rule of rov, the rule of majority, which runs throughout the length and breadth of Torah, except for pikuach nefesh, except for life-threatening situations. In cases of health and in cases where life is in danger, the rule of majority does not apply. Someone has such and such symptoms on Shabbos, on Yom Kippur, or whatever it is. Someone has such and such symptoms, and most people survive and don't die in these situations. Oh, but some people do. Even though a minority, even though a small minority of people die in such and such a situation, it is considered a life-threatening situation, and you have to do what you have to do. If that requires violating Shabbos or Yom Kippur or whatever it is, go for it. The rule of following the majority does not apply in life-threatening situations. In life-threatening situations, as long as there's a possibility that someone's life is in danger, all the rules of life-saving click into place and apply. Well, if you're davening for someone's health, then you want to be sure you're using the correct name. Oh, the name of the mother, well, we always know who gave birth to this person. The name of the father, well, in the majority of cases, just about all cases, the name of the father is the husband of the woman who gave birth to this person. But everyone knows there are a few exceptions to that out there. Everyone knows cases of hanky-panky where the father is not the husband of the woman who gave birth to the person. That's technically called adultery. Everyone knows that cases of adultery occur. Everyone knows that cases of rape occur. It's of course possible that so and so, who is thought to be the father of the person you're davening for, might in fact not be the father. That's a possibility, and therefore, since we're talking about a life-saving situation, davening for someone's health, then we want to be sure that we're naming the person correctly, and that requires the mother's name because there's always a tiny little bit of doubt about whether the father is really the father. Masha en kein beot lama elyon the azlin basaruba. And once the person gets into the next world, once you've passed away and you're in Gan Eden, in the supernal worlds, there the rule of majority works because you've already died, and therefore there's no longer a case of life saving, and therefore the rule of majority works, and therefore when someone has died, it's the father's name who is used. So and so the son of the father, so and so the daughter of the father. Oh, well, now we have a halachic explanation for why to use the mother's name, namely, that we're absolutely sure about. Uh, and in life-saving cases, one must be concerned with the minute possibility that the situation is not what you think it is. In life-threatening situations, even though it's only a minute probability that so and so might die, well, the rule of majority does not apply, and one must be concerned with that. Ulam Kivarayiti, however, I've heard and I know full well, he says, Gam Ashkenaz. We know that in Germany, Ashkenaz, when the poskim talk about Ashkenaz, they mean Germany, as opposed to Poland and Hungary and other places in Eastern Europe. Ashkenaz is the area which is being referred to when the poskim talk about Ashkenaz. In Ashkenaz, in Germany, וגם במדינות גליל עליון באונגרן, and in the Oberland in Hungary, Hungarian geography, Jewish Hungarian geography. The distinction I'm about to make in different areas in Hungary apply only to the Jews. The non-Jews never heard of these distinctions. In northwestern Hungary. When I speak about Hungary, I mean the old Hungarian Empire. In the old Hungarian Empire, the northeastern parts are called the Oberland, the highlands, and the northeastern parts are called the Unterland, the lowlands. And from the Jewish point of view, there's a big difference between them because the Oberland Jews in northwestern part of the old Hungarian Empire, they were culturally oriented to Germany. It's the German Jews who had great influence over them, and indeed German was the language of most of the Jews in the Oberland. In the Unterland, in the northwestern part of Hungary, the Jews were culturally aligned with East European Jews, and primarily the Jews of Poland, and their language was Yiddish. Well, in the German-speaking areas, um, uh, along the Austrian border and along the German border, and uh, and in Germany itself, the rules are just the opposite. In German Jewish tradition, it's just the opposite. The father's name is used in cases of health, and the mother's name, which is used in every other situation. Um, and we'll see that some Sephardic communities fall in line with the Ashkenaz, the old German practice, which is not surprising because historically speaking, after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, a large number of the Jews who were expelled from Spain ended up in Amsterdam, in Hamburg, in places where they had great influence on the Jews of Germany. Well, ki ba'at haniftar Shem Imo in the German areas and in many Sephardic communities, when davening for the deceased, for an elevation of the soul in the next world, the mother's name is used. Kishenotnim pidyon nefesh parnasa, and if you're davening for someone who is still alive in this world, they use the father's name. So what we see so far is a variety of sources leading to very different practices. We've seen one source in Rashi, at least in the Sefer Pardes, well, uh, only only the father. You don't have to use any name. It's all according to one opinion, one formulation of Rashi. According to the Panim Yafos, it should be the mother's name in matters of health, the father's name in other issues. The Divrei Torah informs us that in German Jewish tradition, including the Oberland in Hungary, it's just the reverse. Father's name is used in matters of health, and mother's name is used in other issues. Diversity of practice, and I hope you are not surprised that there are different practices in different communities. Let's take this one step further. The Aruch HaShulchan. As you know, the Aruch HaShulchan is one of my favorite works, written by Rav Yechiel Michael Epstein, right at the beginning of the 20th century. He was the Rav of Nevardak, large Lithuanian community. Kishem rachamim alachole, when you're praying for mercy for the sick, im mevakesh bifnei hachole, if you are in the presence of the patient, if you are in the presence of the sick person, eino tzarich lahazkir shmo, you don't have to mention the name. After all, just standing there in front of the person makes it clear whom you are referring to. Eliyomar, if you're in the presence of the sick person, you should only say, Shlach na refuah lachol, send health to this sick person. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu said, Kel na refa na'ala, just like Moshe Rabbeinu said, oh God, heal her. That's all you have to say. It's all you should say if you are in the presence of the patient. Aval shelo b'fanav. But if you're not in the presence of the patient, tzarich lahazkir, you have to mention shmo, the name of the person you're referring to, together with shem aviv or shem imo. If you're not in the presence of the person, you should mention either the father's name or the mother's name. Well, this goes far to setting our minds at rest. If you have a specific practice, one way or another, in mentioning the father's name or the mother's name, well, there's absolutely no objection to you following the practice which you have embraced. And therefore, there's no reason at all to object to people who are following the opposite practice. Both practices are of equal status. Both practices are of equal stature. They're of equal weight. And someone who does not have a minhag, one way or another, someone who asks, what's the best way to do it? You're free to choose, because both minhagim, both modes of practice, are equally valid. Livareh b'tfilah kesh rachamim, the important thing is that your prayer should be clear. This is true for all prayers. One should think carefully about the language. One should think carefully about the text, and one should strive for clarity of meaning in any prayer that you utter. And that's true when praying for the sick, of course, and therefore being clear and definitive about what you're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for is very important, and therefore mention the name, but it doesn't matter how you formulate it, either with the mother or the father's name. The Gvul Yehuda, written by Rav Tzvirson. He was the Rav Kishinev. Kishinev today is in Romania, just over what it used to be part of the Hungarian Empire, but today it's in Romania. They keep moving these towns in Eastern Europe all around, changing their nationality from time to time. Someone asked me, he writes, these are his Shelot Tshuvot. Someone asked me, Mazkirim oto rak al shem imo. Someone asked me here in Kishinev why we always mention the mother's name when praying for someone's health. Okay. Uh, that's a question that we haven't actually asked yet. All we've seen so far is the approach of the Divrei Torah, the approach of the Munkacher Rebbe, that in matters of health, we do not follow the majority. And since there's a possibility that the father is not actually the biological father, so that's the only explanation we've seen so far. But that has little to do with understanding the conceptual foundations of why the mother's name should be used. Let's see what he says. Le'inyan tefilah lebetzibur. Prayers which are going to be uttered in public, or prayers which are going to be heard by the public or seen by the public if we're publishing the prayer, any prayer which is in a public context, for example, a mishaberach, the typical blessings which are recited after someone gets an aliyah Torah in the synagogue. Yesh losif otam. There's another reason why we mention the mother's name. Tainu, namely, mishum she'al yedei hazchira shel shem ha'av hayta yotzet lefamim takala ubiyush. Mentioning the father's name might sometimes lead to a case of embarrassment. You surely don't want to embarrass the person you are praying for. And sometimes mentioning the father's name might be a source of public embarrassment. Shituki. Oh, Ben Nochri. What happens if the person you're praying for happens to have a non-Jewish father? Well, there are many ways this could happen. Uh, it could be a consensual relationship between a Jewish woman and a non-Jewish man. The child is, of course, going to be Jewish. If that child is sick, you might want to pray for that child, but do you want to mention the non-Jewish father's name? These situations, of course, arise. But it could also be the case of a convert. In the case of a convert, you want to embarrass the convert by using the non-Jewish father's name. Well, all of these are cases which, of course, arise from time to time, but historically speaking, statistically speaking, the case which is by far more common in Jewish history are Jewish children who are produced, who are born as the result of rape. After all, historically speaking, statistically speaking, there's a huge rate, a huge number of cases of rape through Jewish history. Jewish women have been victimized by rape in large numbers throughout the ages. And you don't want to embarrass the person you're praying for by mentioning the non-Jewish father's name. Hare lo yitachen azkiro al shem imo, o afilu al shem avi imo. If you're going to switch to the maternal grandfather's name, so-and-so the son of, and mention the Jewish grandfather's name, well, that's also going to be a little bit embarrassing because everyone knows what you're doing. Bottom line, stick with the mother's name so as to avoid the possibility of embarrassment in cases where the father is not Jewish. Um, uh, or in cases where there was adultery or some other reason why mentioning the father's name is going to be a source of embarrassment. Okay, here we have a perfectly rational and perfectly Reasonable. I'll let you decide whether you find it reasonable or not. We have an explanation for why it's always the mother's name which is used. Um, Magid, written by the author of the Bnei Yisachar, he was one of the great Hasidic masters of the Kishinev. Correct. Kishinev is in Moldova. I said it. I said it's in Romania. Right? They speak Romanian there. Moldovan and Romanian is basically the same language. But you're correct. It's in Moldova. Um, and convert's name is Sarah, so that's no problem. Uh, the great Hasidic master of Nachon, use the mother's name for everything. If it's a public declaration. Um, he says as follows. He quotes the Gemara that we started with this evening, that you don't have to mention the name, just like Moshe Rabbeinu said, Rafa Na'ala, oh God, heal her. Ze'eno move on, but I don't understand this, the Magid Ta'aluma says. Don't understand. We have to come to a deeper understanding of the Gemara, the passage in the Gemara that we started with. Of course, you have to mention the name of the person you're davening for. What difference does it make whether you're in the person's presence or not in the person's presence? Shouldn't you always specify the name? After all, just because you're in one person's presence doesn't mean you're not davening for someone else. Of course, you can daven for more people at the same time. Shouldn't you always mention the name? If you're going to tell me that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows who you are referring to, especially if you're standing in that person's presence, if that's the point, that you don't have to mention the name because HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what's in your heart, Im Kain, Ein Tzarich Litpalel Rak B'Machshava, then you don't have to pray at all. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what's in your heart, then why utter any prayer? HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what's in your heart. He knows that you want mercy for this person. Why bother uttering? Why bother speaking out any prayer at all? It must be that there is importance in speaking out the prayer. Hine ra'iti le'echad kodesh Harav Morenu Rabbeinu Rav Chaim Efranim Masikol. I saw one of the grandsons of the Baal Shem Tov, one of the great leaders of the Hasidic movement, wrote in his Sefer Degel Machane Ephraim. Degel Machane Ephraim was what was the first great Hasidic work, the first great Hasidic book. And he writes there, Al kol panim nirmaz b'zeh shmo de Miriam bas Yocheved. Moshe Rabbeinu did not mention Miriam's name. He did not actually mention his name, but he did hint at her name. He did refer to her name, not directly, because he said, Refa na, please heal her. And those words, Refa na, please heal her, add up to a numerical value, which is identical with Miriam Bas Yocheved, Miriam, the daughter of Yocheved. So the words that Moshe Rabbeinu chose to pray for the health of his sister Miriam, those words have a gematria, a numerical value identical to her name. So he was referring to her name. And the Magid Ta'aluma says, well, maybe you always have to mention the name, or at least imply the name, hint to the name, refer to the name, to do something to specify whom you are talking about. Al kol panim, כשאין מזכירים שם בפירוש, בכדי שלא יהיה איזה קטרוג, if you don't want to mention the name specifically, outright, flat out, because you're afraid that mentioning the name might awaken some claims in the heavenly court against the person you are davening for. If you don't want to mention the name explicitly, mention the name indirectly, like Moshe Rabbeinu did. Pray with a gematria, a numerical value, which is going to be identical to the person's name. And this is why the Gemara ended with the word Lo Shema de Miriam. Moshe did not say the name of Miriam. Moshe Rabbeinu did not say the name of Miriam. Well, he didn't say the name, but he did refer to the gematria. He did refer to the numerical value of the name. According to this, Yitachen dehachi kamor, this is what the Gemara meant. Do not mention, Moshe Rabbeinu did not mention her name explicitly. He only referred to her name as a gematria. Well, we're adding more and more variations. According to the Maggid Ta'aluma, even in the presence of the person you're davening for, the name should be explicitly mentioned or at least hinted at. Therefore, the name always has to be referred to. He does not enter into the question of using the father or the mother's name, but one or the other always should be used in every circumstance. Now, let me see if I can formulate an underlying principle which unifies all of the various practices, all of the various minhagim which we have seen. As the sources teach us, it is not for God's benefit that we have to mention the name of the person we are davening for. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows who you're referring to. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what's in your heart. It's not for God's benefit. It's not for Him, not for God that we are mentioning the name. That leaves the only other possibility. Mentioning the name we are doing for ourselves. Why do we mention? Why is it important for us to mention the name? Surely it's not important for Kodesh Baruch, even when you do say the name. For example, Moshe ben Miriam, whatever the name is, Shlomo ben David, whatever the name is, whenever you mention the name, probably there are quite a few other people in the community with exactly the same name. After all, there are only a limited number of names which are common in any given community, and therefore, combination of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, that combination of names surely occurs, almost always occurs in more than one instance in any community. Specifying the name is not so specific after all. There are probably other people who have the same name. And Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't need the name. Kodesh Baruch Hu knows who you are referring to. Kodesh Baruch Hu knows what is in your heart. You're mentioning the name for yourself, because by mentioning the name, by clarifying the name when you pray for the person, and by praying out loud, not only in your heart, but out loud, you are internalizing your feeling. Oh, something just went terribly wrong here. What went wrong? I hope we're all still together. I lost the screen. Maybe I can get it back.
We hear you.
Okay, well, I'm going to
You're
keep
coming
talking.
through loud and clear.
Yeah, okay. I don't know what happened to the screen, but okay, we're going to try again. Here goes. Oh, okay. Back. At least by me it came back. Um, by mentioning the name, by being explicit, you are in your feelings Now you will feel a stronger connection with the person you're davening for. Mentioning the person's name strengthens your internal emotional relationship, your connection with the person you are davening for, and that is the unifying underlying reason for all of the various practices, for all the various minhagim. All of the minhagim are kosher. They're all acceptable because they all achieve exactly the same purpose, strengthening your connection with the person you are davening for. That is very important. Let's go one step further. Rav Kanievsky, one of the great rabbis of Bnei Brak. Lost my annotator here. Here it's coming back. Here again, a sefer written by the disciples of Rav Kanievsky. Rav Kanievsky said, "B'nocharuti," he said, "in my presence, le'achad she'imetz yeled." What about an adopted child? The mother is not the biological mother. The father is not the biological father. Are you supposed to use the name of the biological mother or the biological father when davening for an adopted person? Higishlo et shmo kadesh yitpalel alav, and someone asked Rav Kanievsky, please daven for so and so. V'amar lo morenu v'rabbeinu sheyichtov et shem ishto ha'metzet. And Rav Kanievsky, the great rabbi, said, tell me the name of the adoptive mother. I'm not going to pray for this person using the name of the biological mother. I'm going to daven using the name of the adoptive mother. Dahainu ploni ben plonis shem ha'metzet. I want to know the adoptive mother's name when I daven for this person. After all, that is the person who raised the child. Among Moreno Rabbeinu, the rabbi told me that he heard from the Chazon Ish, his great brother-in-law and colleague, Efshar litpalel al choleh gam im lo yod'im et shmo. Of course, you can daven for someone, even if you do not know that person's name. And if all you know is the first name, go for it. If all you know is the family name, go for it. Of course, you can daven, even if you do not know any of the proper formulations which we have had. The prayer is always good, and it's the adoptive mother who is viewed in the community as being the mother. That's the person who raised the child. That's the person whose name should be used. Okay, at this point, I want to turn to some unusual situations. When praying for someone who is sick, sometimes we have a situation of a terminal patient, a patient who is suffering greatly, terminal cancer patient, well, all kinds of situations arise. And sometimes a patient is suffering so much that death would be a solution to the person's problems. Well, that's what we can't commit euthanasia. We could devote another series of shiurim on the prohibition of euthanasia. We're not talking about that, chas v'shalom, but what about praying for someone to be relieved of his or her suffering through death? The Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim, one of the great Rishonim from Spain, wrote, Lif'amim tzarich levakesh rachamim al choleh sheyamut. Sometimes one must pray for mercy for the patient, that the patient die. Kagon, for example, shemitzta'er hacholeh b'chol harbe. For example, someone is suffering greatly in his or her sickness. It's impossible that the person will survive. It's a terminal patient. Kid'amrinin, just like we learn in the Gemara, al amato shel Rebbe. Rebbe had a maid servant. And this, incidentally, is one of several stories in which women are involved. If you think about the sources of the halachas of prayer, most of the sources of halachas of prayer are learned from Hannah, who prayed silently at the in the presence of Eli. Eli was the Kohen. Eli did not understand what Hannah was doing, davening silently. He thought she was drunk or something. But given a conflict between what Eli, the Kohen, thought was the proper way to daven, and Hannah, the way the woman was davening, it's the woman's approach, which was embraced subsequently by all the poskim. Here we have another case of a woman, the maid servant of Rebbe, Hitpalala, she prayed that he would die. Lachein kamo, therefore, המבקר חולה גורם שיחיה, היינו שמועילה בתפילתו לחיות. Of course, if there's some reasonable expectation of recovery, you want to daven for health, that's true. ומי שאינו מבקרו, if you don't visit the person, or the person has no reasonable expectation of surviving, it's proper to daven for the person's death as a relief from great suffering. In a case where there's great suffering, if it's not great suffering, so obviously this does not apply. Now, this opinion of the Ran is a little bit controversial, not very. The Tzitz Eliezer was not happy with the approach of the maid servant. Tzitz Eliezer of Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, 20th century leading posek in Eretz Yisrael, he was not happy with the approach of the maid servant, and he was of the opinion, she'ein halacha kedivrei Haran, we do not paskin like the maid servant who davened that Rebbe should die. Therefore, he held it's prohibited to die it's prohibited to pray for someone to die. And in the case of the maidservant, all the Talmidim, all the disciples, and all the rabbis were praying for Rebbe to live, to be cured, and to survive. Only the maidservant prayed for his death. And of course, according to the Tzitz Eliezer, we do not follow the opinion of the maidservants. On the other hand, the majority of poskim, large majority of the poskim, embrace the approach of the Ran. Large majority of the poskim embrace the approach of the maidservant. Rav Brown in the Sharim Mitzuyanim, Rav Lifshitz in the Tiferes Yisrael, the Tiferes Yaakov. The list could be much longer of great poskim through the generations who have accepted and embraced the opinion of the Ran and the maidservant, that in the case where, number one, there's no reasonable expectation of recovery, and number two, the patient is suffering greatly, it is correct to daven for mercy that the person, the victim, the patient, be relieved from his or her suffering through death. Rav Moshe Feinstein had a similar approach. Let me illustrate for a moment the way the story went in the case of the maidservant. Rebbe was suffering greatly in the house. All the disciples and all the other rabbis were standing outside the house on the sidewalk, praying for his recovery, for his survival. The maidservant went up onto the roof and prayed for him to die. Well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't hear her prayers, didn't accept her prayers. Then she took a bucket of water, poured the bucket of water down on all the rabbis' heads, the disciples' heads. For a moment, they stopped davening because they were so surprised that this maidservant was pouring a bucket of water on their heads, and her prayer penetrated to the Kisei HaKavod. HaKadosh Baruch Hu heard her, and Rebbe died. That's the story. As far as coma is concerned, the Igros Moshe assumes, the sources are quite clear in rabbinic literature, that the separation of the soul, the body, in conceptual terms, that's what death is. In conceptual terms, death is the process. Death is the process of separating the soul from the body. That's an uncomfortable, that's a painful situation, and therefore Rav Moshe Feinstein presumes that patients who are comatose are suffering until there's evidence to the contrary. Neurologists do not know what's going on. There's no way to know what's going on in the minds of comatose patients. Um, uh, Rav Moshe Feinstein presumes that they are suffering until there's evidence to the contrary. But he held, if someone is suffering greatly and medical therapy doesn't help, uh, the therapy is not going to cure the person, only prolong his or her suffering. Earlier prayers that the person be healed have not been accepted by Kodesh Baruch Hu. You have to daven for the person to die. One last issue for today. What about praying for someone who is not Jewish? Um, Either a friend or possibly a family member or a, one of the Hatufim, if one of the uh, prisoners in Gaza is not Jewish, is it proper to daven for mercy for non-Jewish people? Well, this is a question which is addressed by Rav Pinchas Zvichi in his Sefer. Let's see his approach. After all, if we're going to daven for someone who's not Jewish, well, using the name of the father, the name of the mother becomes an irrelevant question. But what should we do? Should we daven for the non-Jewish person's health, or should we busy ourselves with other activities? Here's his tshuva. It says in the Talmud Yerushalmi, Rav Amar, Tzarich Lomar, Arur Haman, Arurim Banav. On Purim, we curse Haman and his sons. Amar of Pinchas, Tzarich Lomar, Charvon, Zochel Tov. But we also, on Purim, praise Harvona, one of the minor characters, a non-Jewish character in Megillas Esther, who we remember with praise because he was on the side of the Jews. Well, now it's perfectly clear that it's correct to praise and mention the name of Harvona, even though he was a boy, even though he was not Jewish. It's perfectly correct to daven for that person. Zot kevan shediber tov al Mordechai, since Harvona spoke in the presence of the king, he spoke in favor of Mordechai, and since he helped the Jewish people, it's entirely correct to daven for him. And halacha, as far as halacha is concerned, we paskin like that passage in the Yerushalmi. And if you think back to last Purim, you remember everyone saying, Harvona Zochor Latov. That is indeed part of Jewish tradition. V'cheinu b'Shulchan Aruch, we find the same thing in the Shulchan Aruch. After reading the Megillah on Purim, we say, Orur Haman Baruch Mordechai, v'Harvona Zochor Latov. We mention Harvona's name after the reading of the Megillah on Purim. Imkain, therefore, the conclusion is, Yesh lilmod nidon did. Therefore, in the case of non-Jewish soldiers in Israel who've been captured by the enemy, even though it's a non-Jewish soldier in the Israeli army captured by the enemy, it's entirely correct to daven for that person. Re'eod b'divrei Sefer Hasidim, the Sefer Hasidim written by, this is before the Hasidic movement, the Hasidim of medieval Germany, the Hasidic Ashkenaz, 13th century, wrote אם אדם מדבר בשבח צדיקים, ben Yehudim, ben Goyim, it's correct to praise and correct to daven for tzadikim, whether they are Jewish or not. Kagon, Oto Ploni Asal Yisrael Hatova, if someone has done something good for the Jewish people, of course it's correct to daven for that person. And therefore, praying for the non-Jewish sick is also correct. You don't want to pray for the survival of Rishaim, people who are wicked, but people who are tzaddikim definitely deserve our prayers, whether they are Jewish or not. With this, I'm going to conclude the survey of the sources this evening. And next Monday in this series, I'm going to be talking about using gas flames to cook with on Yom Tov. Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot is coming up. And next Wednesday, we'll talk about adding personal requests in the middle of the Shmoneh Esrei, in the middle of the Amidah, in the middle of the silent prayer. I wish you a good week and a safe week and a Chodesh Tov and a Ketiva v'Chatima Tova, and look forward to seeing you all again in the continuation of the Web Yeshiva.
Thank you,
Shalom.
Rabbi, very much. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Have
Very
a
Welcome.
safe
informative.
week. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much.
much.
Shalom, shalom.
Where's the closest?